It is very likely that you as a pre-med or as a first-year med student are going to change your mind, which is totally okay. That's good. You should change your mind. Did you know that the proportion of men versus women who graduate from residency and stay in the same state is actually notably different? So I didn't either. And we have 10 medical residency trends. I guarantee that at least a few of these are going to surprise you. Let's start with the first one, which is that less than 1/3 of graduating medical students have the same residency specialty preference as they did in their first year of medical school. In 2025, only 29.4% of students indicated the same specialty preference at graduation compared to their first year choice. Which makes sense, right? First year med students don't fully understand what a specialty is and isn't because they have very limited exposure, similar to a college pre-med. So maybe they had some light shadowing experience, but nothing compared to the clinical rotations they'll experience on their third year clerkships. They may have some pop culture references, maybe some TV shows, maybe they've talked to a few people here and there or done some research online. But a big part of it is when you're actually there as a third year, you really get a much better understanding of the types of people and just what the day-to-day life is and the bread and butter of what you're going to see most days in that specialty. And the reason this is particularly important, especially for pre-meds, is that you don't necessarily know what you're going to go into. I was so set. I thought I knew my life purpose of pediatric gastroenterology because I have inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, and I wanted to help kids that have similar conditions. Long story short, between first and second year of med school, I did some clinical research and realized it wasn't the field for me. And I fell in love with plastic surgery. So it is very likely that you as a pre-med or as a first year med student are going to change your mind, which is totally okay. That's good. You should change your mind. If you have the same beliefs that you did as a child to when you are as an adult, that's kind of weird, right? So same thing here. You should evolve and your preferences should change as you get more information. But this is why I find it so critical. And our philosophy at Med School Insiders is that you want to maintain optionality. So for the pre-meds who are hoping to get into medical school, optionality is key. You may be set on, like me, pediatric gastroenterology, second least competitive specialty in all of medicine, very low bar compared to other specialties. And then you get to med school, you change your mind, and then you realize, wow, damn, plastic surgery, neurosurgery, these are some of the most competitive, way harder, right? Optionality means number one, getting into a medical school that actually opens doors. So despite what's very popular to say on social media, because I think this is well-intentioned and it feels good, but it actively harms pre-meds, which is why I find it so frustrating. Like not all med schools are created equal, first of all. So MD versus DO, you're gonna have way more optionality, way more upside by going MD versus DO. That's why the overwhelming majority of students use DO as a backup. That's just what the fact is. People don't like to say that because they think it's a value judgment, which is not. You can be a great doctor, whether you're DO or MD. That's not the point here. The point is as a pre-med, you want to go MD to maintain optionality. Similarly, not all MD medical schools are created equal. There are going to be schools that open up additional doors for any subspecialty you choose, and you probably will change your mind, right? So larger, higher ranked institutions affiliated with these large academic centers are going to have an ENT residency. So if you decide you want to go into ENT, then you have the mentorship, the research opportunities, the letters of recommendation, et cetera, that are going to help you get into ENT residency. If you go to a smaller medical school that doesn't have an ENT residency program, then you as a med student are going to have a harder time matching into that specialty. It's not impossible, people do it, but it is significantly harder. And why would you put yourself at a disadvantage for something as challenging as matching into ENT as an example? So just to summarize, this is why we focus so much on optionality, because as a pre-med, you want to keep your doors open. And just getting into a medical school does not keep all the doors open the same way as getting into an optimal medical school for your priorities and your future career. Number two, specialties with the highest continuity of preference between first year of medical school to graduation were orthopedic surgery, neurosurgery, and pediatrics. Interesting. Why is that? Now you guys tell me what you think the reasons are with a comment down below. I'm going to speculate here. I think for pediatrics, it's very clear. Most people are better informed than I was. I was a very poorly informed first year med student that was way too idealistic in terms of what it meant to work with kids. I think most people who want to go into pediatrics, they have probably much more experience than I did in terms of interacting with and dealing with kids and what, the pros and cons that come with that. And I had only really spent much time with, my baby cousins and things like that. So I was just poorly informed. Number two, neurosurgery. I think the reason this one has a higher continuity is because, all right, kind of a spicy take here. I think those who are pre-meds who decide to go into neurosurgery are doing so oftentimes because there's a high degree of motivation or a high prioritization on things like prestige or ego or compensation, right? And neurosurgery, of course, number one in compensation, has the highest prestige and ego, I'd say, of any specialty. which isn't a good or a bad thing. I mean, it is what it is. You know, to the layperson, if they hear your brain surgeon, like, oh my God, that is crazy, you must, et cetera, et cetera. And I love neurosurgery too. I wasn't as gung-ho about it, but you know, I've always been super fascinated with the brain, most interesting organ system in the whole body, I would argue. And I was a neuroscience major in college, and neurosurgery was on my list when I realized that pediatrics wasn't for me. And you can actually see why I didn't pick neurosurgery in this why I didn't neurosurgery video right up here. But one of the big things for me was actually how crude neurosurgery is. I think a lot of people assume that it is super meticulous and precise, but plastic surgery is way more precise and attention to detail, meticulous in a way that is appealing to me. And not everyone really cares about that, but I did. Whereas neurosurgery was more directionally, I'm not gonna say it's the same as orthopedic surgery, which we'll get to next, but it was definitely in the middle between plastics and ortho. Which brings us to orthopedic surgery. And I think orthopedic surgery is pretty easy to understand because it is so concrete, mechanical, bones. Like, it's not one of the specialties that has a high degree of misunderstanding between what the layperson believes it is or what a premed believes it is and what it actually is. And I think there are so many people who enjoy sports and mechanics and that kind of thing that orthopedic surgery focuses on, that those who are gravitated towards it at the beginning are probably not going to be dissuaded by less important factors to most people, like how crude orthopedic surgery is. So for those who don't know, neurosurgery, orthopedic surgery, and plastic surgery were my 3 top specialties of interest after I decided that peds GI wasn't for me. And the big thing for ortho and neurosurgery was actually the fact that they were both a lot more crude than I was expecting. And just based on my personality type, I really like precision and nuance and, like, you know, obsessing over wound closure and minimizing scar and having the perfect suturing technique and seeing the staple gun in ortho just like wasn't my personality. And again, no right or wrong, no good or bad, just like pros and cons. Next. Number 3, first-year residents in neurosurgery report participating in the highest average number of abstracts, presentations, and publications. We call those 3 things research items. No surprise, neurosurgery is consistently in the top 2 for the highest research item count, trading places with plastic surgery. Neurosurgery has a very high degree of PhD, like MD, PhD students that pursue the field. And it is also just a very academically focused specialty. So not surprised there at all. In fact, what we're going to do is pull up specialtyrank.com. And here in 2024, I'm going to click on the research column. Yeah, so neurosurgery 37.4 in 2024. Plastic surgery was 34.7. If we go back to 2022 data, then plastic surgery was number 1 at 28.4, neurosurgery number 2 at 25.5. Going back to 2020, neurosurgery again at the top, 23.4, plastic surgery 19.1. So neurosurgery is consistently number 1 or number 2. You are seeing a trend of these research items increasing, which is something we cover in other videos. But this free tool, specialtyrank.com, does include all of the NRMP data from the last decade in case you want to play around and see how specialties stack up to one another. All right, number 4, since 2019, the number of active residents has annually increased by about 4,000. In 2025, the AAMC recorded 163,000 medical residents in the US. And that's good. We need the growth. We have this growing physician shortage, especially in rural areas, primarily in rural areas. And while that growth is welcome, we're hoping we can accelerate that growth. We talk about some of the legislation around opening more residency positions, additional Medicare funding, in other videos. Number 5, across all specialties and subspecialties, women, for the first time, accounted for the majority of residents and fellows. In 2024 to 2025, 50.2% of residents were women, compared to 49.1% in 23, 48.3% in 2022, and 47.3% in 21. So I guess that kind of makes sense. So there's 2 things happening here. Number 1, the number of women have been the majority in terms of matriculants to medical school, meaning more women are matriculating to med school compared to men back since I think 2017. That's based on AAMC data, but I might be misremembering, but I think it was 2017. And I mean, med school is 4 years, so I would expect in 2021 that they would then be the majority because med school is generally 4 years. Yes, some students take gap years and some students do additional degrees and et cetera, but overwhelming majority of students go through in 4 years. So why is it only 47.3 in 2021? Does that mean that a higher proportion of women are not pursuing residency after completing medical school? Or the other thing I see here is it accounts for both residents and fellows. Now here I'm wondering if maybe women that complete residency then go on to fellowship at a different rate versus men. So maybe men do a higher degree of fellowships than women, perhaps. I don't know. Again, just speculating here to try to figure out why there's such a mismatch between females being the majority of matriculants in 2017 And then 2021, 2022, and 2023, they're still not the majority. That doesn't make sense because women have been the majority in medical school matriculants ever since, again, roughly 2017. So yeah, by 2023, how are they still not the majority of residents? So I would say, number one, maybe men and women pursue fellowship at different rates. And then number two, maybe women pursue residency versus going into alternate paths at also a different rate than men. Not sure. Number 6, by race and ethnicity, 45.9% of US citizen MD residents reported white, 23.6% reported Asian, 9.3% Hispanic or Latino, 7.1% Black, 0.6% American Indian or Alaska Native. By the way, it's just Native American. Let's stop saying American Indian. 0.5% Middle Eastern or North African, and 0.2% Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. So a lot of attention being drawn to demographics in terms of ethnicity and equal outcomes versus equal opportunity and that whole discussion. Not going to get into that here. There is one thing that I find interesting though. Every single year, this has been for, going back to more than a decade, possibly even multiple decades, Asian students consistently have the highest MCAT, the highest GPA. And there's always the option to not disclose your race or ethnicity. And the funny thing I noticed is that if you look at the average MCAT and GPA of the group that chooses not to disclose, it very closely ties to the average of the Asian MCAT and the Asian GPA. And I think the reason is because, it's pretty common knowledge now, and most would agree that Asians have the highest barrier to entry, just based on, schools don't want to have a predominantly Asian class, and some are going to make the counter argument that, because, Asian students may not have the same level of X, Y, and Z soft components as these non-Asian students, that maybe they don't interview as well. Like these are really far stretches that I don't see any evidence for. What it really comes down to is Asian students are held to a higher standard because otherwise a lot of these institutions would be majority Asian, because Asians do tend to excel in academics, right? Just based on culture and whatever other factors. So my read of the data is that there are many students that don't want to be discriminated against. Like as an Asian, they say, why am I being held to such a high standard? Let me choose not to disclose in terms of my race and ethnicity, hoping that it's going to work in their favor, that they won't have this high bar set for them. At least that's the theory, because again, the average MCAT GPA of the other/choose not to disclose group is very close to the Asian group. And if you are in one of these other groups that has more of an advantage to actually disclose, then the incentives are such that you would not want to choose other/do not disclose. You want to disclose it because then, again, the bar and the average MCAT, average GPA for your group is possibly going to work in your favor. But again, we'll see now with the new Supreme Court ruling that now bans the consideration of ethnicity in admissions decisions, whether these numbers actually do start shifting or not. And anyway, that's a whole nother conversation for another video. Number 7, more than half, or 55.7% of physicians who completed their residencies between 2015 and 2024 are practicing in the state where their residency training took place, which makes sense. And one thing you hear a lot in med school is that choose carefully where you actually do residency, because you are very likely to continue practicing there as an attending. You're going to have various job opportunities, your network, etc. It's going to be a lot easier for you to secure a position in that state and possibly even in nearby cities, rather than moving across the country. Now, can you move across the country? Of course, it's not a super challenging, impossible thing at all. It's just about probabilities here. So no surprise there. Part of that too is obviously going to be you want to choose a residency in a state that you enjoy living in, and you want to also practice as an attending in a state that you enjoy living in too. So not the most shocking discovery. Number 8, women are more likely than men by a difference of 58.7% and 53.2% respectively to practice in the state where they completed their residency training between 2015 and 2024. That is interesting, and I wonder, there's probably some like evolutionary biology or psychology reason why we see that difference. Is it because of family ties? Is it because of risk-taking? Is it because of whatever differences that there are between men and women? I don't know, but that is interesting to see. I mean, just speculating, I would imagine that because if you look at the bell curve, like men have a wider distribution, they're going to be more risk-taking, more extreme. That's why, going back, you see a lot of these explorers and high-risk tolerance individuals are oftentimes men. So I wonder if there's some kind of personality tendency. Again, bell curves here, so just like not all men are taller than all women, there are women that are taller than men and vice versa. Like the bell curves, men on average are taller than women. So like, hopefully we can talk to that nuance, and there's not going to be some angry comments below talking about, unfair biases or painting, broad strokes. But on average, men are going to be more risk tolerant than women, and they also have a more extreme distribution. So in terms of the normal curve, the ends go further. And I wonder if with that wider range, men choose to take on the risk of moving to a new state for less of a reason than maybe the average woman. Again, averages, bell curves here, disclaimer, just speculating. Number 9, California has the highest retention rate with 75.7% of physicians practicing in that state after completing their residency there. The District of Columbia has the lowest retention rate at 66.4%. That is interesting, and as someone who was born and raised in California, I now live in Las Vegas, Nevada. For residency, I ranked programs heavily in a geographic preference. I wanted to be in California and SoCal. And even when I was applying to medical school, like after I got into some California programs, like I didn't even attend my NYU, Cornell, University of Hawaii. There were many interviews I just declined and didn't even interview at once I got few acceptances in California and some other states as well. So if you ask me, I mean, it's the weather. It's really nice. Vegas is also pretty nice, just dry and way too hot in the summer. And number 10, among those who completed residency training between 2015 and 2024 and now hold a full-time faculty position, 78.5% are at the assistant professor level. I guess they saved the worst for last. Definitely the least interesting trend. And there you have it, my friends. Check out specialtyrank.com if you want to see how different specialties stack up. Much love, and I'll see you all in the next one.